Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2017 Inter-Service Industry Training, Simulation, and Education Conference is now called to order. I'm David Hutchings, and for this past year, it's been my privilege to serve as your conference chair. General Perkins, Mr. Ariel, General Carlisle, Admiral Robb, and other general and flag officers, both active and retired, distinguished guests, representatives of allied nations, and exhibitors and conference attendees from government, industry, and academia, on behalf of this year's lead service, the United States Army, and the entire conference committee, I welcome you to the 51st anniversary of the world's largest modeling, training, simulation, and education event, ITSEC 2017. Now I'd like to invite this year's lead service executive, Brigadier General William Cole from the United States Army, to the podium for the posting of the flag, which will be followed by the national anthem sung by Ms. Midge Cole and an invocation offered by Mr. Jerry Sermons, PEO Technical Director. Please stand.
Present the colors. Would all of you please bow with me? O Almighty God, the sovereign commander of all the world, we pray for your blessings on this conference and for all of us assembled here to further its noble goals. We thank you for the vision and strength of those past conference leaders who, through their wisdom, realized that together our burdens could be lighter, our impacts more profound, and our service greater if we work shoulder to shoulder toward our common goals. Lord, we beseech you to enlighten our understanding of the various ideas and concepts that will enable us to harness new technologies to win in a complex world. Innovations that will support the global mission of the brave men and women charged with our defense. We pray the fruits from our efforts here this week will ultimately translate into missions accomplished, lives saved, and responsibilities faithfully discharged. We thank you for our military and civilian leaders present here today. We applaud their faithful service during these challenging times and pray that through their leadership, we will maintain a unity of purpose that will promote the protection of our families, communities, and nation. Lastly, Lord, we pray especially for those brave men and women in harm's way who are serving on our behalf around the world. Please protect them as they protect us. Keep them safe from all hidden dangers as they accomplish their missions, and let your faithful promises be their armor and protection. And as they make you, Lord, the refuge and shelter, let no evil conquer them, for you are God in whose hand is power and might, which none is able to withstand. In your most holy name we pray. Amen.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the large screens for this year's theme video. Each year, someone from industry is chosen to chair this conference, and together with that year's lead service, it's our job to develop a theme to help guide the development of the conference program and the associated proceedings. The video you just saw perfectly illustrates this year's theme, Harnessing New Technologies to Win in a Complex World. And it emphasizes the need to step back and look at the many new technologies strategies that we have to address wide-ranging challenges we face throughout the world. This week provides the perfect opportunity for the best and the brightest in our industry to come together and exchange ideas on how we can continue to harness new technologies in areas that include big data and big data analytics, virtual and augmented reality, a next-generation synthetic training environment, human performance measurement, cyber, and integrating LVC systems into even more complex and realistic ways. Having served in the United States Navy Submarine Force, I know firsthand the training I received was paramount to my survival. Your life and everyone else's on board depends on everyone knowing exactly what to do, no matter where you are in the boat and no matter what the casualty is. After the Navy, I began my 34-year career in the training field as a training analyst at the beginning of the Trident submarine program. Throughout my career, no matter what my role or position was, I've learned the true value and meaning of an effective training solution, and that is saving the lives of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. I can tell you from personal experience that nothing hits home like having a son or daughter being deployed overseas to serve in Afghanistan, as my daughter was in 2008 and 2009. I firmly believe the training she received throughout her enlistment contributed greatly to keeping her safe during her 15-month deployment. Again and again, we hear those stories, how service members were able to prevail when what they had learned in training kicked in automatically. While ITSEC has a distinctly military heritage, what we do applies to a much larger audience, including healthcare, transportation, energy, and manufacturing, as you'll see represented here this week. But what sets this conference apart from others is the unique blend of high-quality, peer-reviewed papers and presentations coupled with over 450 exhibitors demonstrating the most relevant and cutting-edge technologies. The strength of our program is due to the efforts of over 350 volunteers from government, industry, and academia who worked tirelessly this past year to bring you this program. Under the leadership of my trusted partner and this year's program chair, Mr. Brian Holmes, this group created a program of 129 technical papers, 21 tutorials, and 21 special events, as well as other programs, including our third annual Operation Blended Warrior. This year, Operation Blended Warrior is expanding to include foreign entities from Sweden and NATO in our architecture. We're also exploring wireless solutions and opportunities in the cloud. We have our sights on virtual servers, simulation as a service, and the impact of 5G networks as a disruptive capability. We're systematically attacking all the reasons systems cannot be connected, which spans everything including hardware, software, standards, protocols, security, encryption, and policy challenges. My thanks to the leadership of this conference and to the many volunteers who have made it possible. It has been my honor to serve as your conference chair. A very special thanks to all the men and women who have served or are currently serving in the armed forces. My hope is that we can all recommit this week to work together to continue harnessing new technologies and provide them with the best training, simulation, and education solutions possible. It is now my privilege to recognize a few of the very special guests we have with us here today. I'd like to ask each one to stand briefly as their name is called, and I would appreciate it if the audience would hold their applause until they've all been introduced. The senior officers for this morning's General and Flag Officer panel will be introduced during that event. General David Perkins, Commanding General, U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, Fort Eustis, Virginia, and our government keynote speaker. Mr. Don Ariel, co-founder and chief executive officer of Radon Corporation and our industry keynote speaker. General Hawk Carlisle, United States Air Force retired and chief executive officer, National Defense Industrial Association. Rear Admiral James Robb, United States Navy retired, president of the National Training and Simulation Association. Colonel Philip Carpenter, United States Air Force Chief, Simulators Program Office, Air Force Material Command, Wright Pat Air Force Base, Ohio, and the Air Force Principal, Mr. Tony Dalsasso. Captain Eric Etz, Commanding Officer, United States Navy, Naval Air Warfare Center, Training Systems Division, and the Navy Principal, Ms. Diana Teal. Colonel Walter Yates, United States Marine Corps Program Manager for Training Systems, Marine Corps Systems Command, and the Marine Corps Principals, Mr. Martin Bushika. Mr. Greg Knapp, Chief, Strategy and Training, Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness and Training, and the OSD Principal, Mr. Shep Barge. And from our lead service, Brigadier General William Cole, United States Army Program Executive Officer, Simulation, Training, and Instrumentation, and the Army Principal, Ms. Tracy Jones. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished guests and dignitaries. Now I'd like to welcome Brigadier General Cole back to the stage for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our Department of Defense and congressional officials, our senior military leaders, representatives from our coalition and partner nations who are in attendance today, industry members, academic partners, and especially our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen who are able to attend today's conference. It is truly an honor for me to represent the U.S. Army as the lead service for this year's ITSEC. For each of the last 50 years of this conference, attendees have returned to their workplace invigorated with the knowledge that they have learned about the latest modeling and simulation technology available. The open communication between the military, industry, and academia that this conference provides fits well into the stated goals of U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis in reference to the critical importance of military readiness. At the recent Association of the United States Army Conference, Secretary Mattis said, and I quote, "The reality that faces our Department of Defense and our like-minded allies is that we must have militaries fit for their purpose and fit for their time in these days of emerging challenges." In that same speech, he stressed the importance of the military working together with industry to prepare for those challenges. And he said, "I also want us to remember that corporations are made up of Americans too, and I want open communications. No favoritism, no violations of law, or no violations of ethics," he said. "But I no longer want this gulf between us to deny us the very advances from American industry that are out there that industry is executing for themselves and the private sector." So as Secretary Mattis says, by taking full advantage of the many seminars, panels, educational sessions, and social events that are planned, our time over the next few days during this ITSEC conference will prove to be very beneficial to the success of our respective missions. Speaking of success in missions, it is my honor to welcome our keynote speaker this morning, General David G. Perkins, the Commanding General of the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. General Perkins has an outstanding resume of service to our Army and our nation, dating back to his commissioning as an armor officer in 1980. Since that day at the United States Military Academy, his superb leadership abilities were quickly recognized in each successive challenging position to which he was entrusted. Please allow me to highlight just a few of those career roles that had a tremendously positive impact on our Army doctrine, and most importantly, the combat readiness of our soldiers. General Perkins has held leadership positions in armor and mechanized infantry units in Europe, the United States, and the Middle East. They include Commanding General of the 4th Infantry Division, where his primary mission was to assist and develop the Iraqi security forces in the U.S. Division North to take responsibility following the transition of U.S. forces from Iraq. He also served as the commander of the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division Mechanized during the invasion of Iraq, while commanding the unit's famed Thunder Run into Baghdad. And during subsequent stability operations in Operation Iraqi Freedom, he earned the Silver Star, the nation's 3rd highest award for valor. His key staff assignments have included Deputy Chief of Staff for Multinational Forces Iraq, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations for the United States Army Europe, and Special Assistant to the Speaker of the House, United States House of Representatives. Prior to this current assignment, General Perkins served as the commander of the United States Army Combined Arms Center, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming General David G. Perkins.
Well, thanks for that kind introduction, and it's a great pleasure and actually opportunity for me to come here to speak today. You know, when you take a look at what the focus of this conference is, and my current job title, there's a lot of overlap there. So a lot of people may say, you know, what's a training and doctrine command, or as referred to it, TRADOC? What's a TRADOC for? And I could go into a lengthy explanation with line and block diagrams and missions and visions and everything like that, but I know you'd rather have a whole day of that separately, so I won't bore you with that. I will give you a quick synopsis. So what does TRADOC have to do with what's going on here today? Well, a couple things. As the name would imply, Training and Doctrine Command, we are the proponent for training in the Army. We write the doctrine, we write the manuals, we train people how to train, and we trained everybody in the Army from basic training all the way up to Sergeant Major's Academy and Command General Staff College, Ranger School, Airborne School, Welding School, Cyber, whatever. So we are very much involved as the proponent of training in the Army in that endeavor. We deliver simulations to the Army. The National Simulation Center is out at Combined Arms Center, Fort Leavenworth, part of TRADOC, so we are very much involved in that. And we are the proponent and run professional military education for the entire Army under the leadership of Mike Lundy out at the Combined Arms Center. Again, from basic training, the Captain's Career Course, Command General Staff College, SAMS, Sergeant Major's Academy, et cetera. So we really deliver training, simulations, and education to the whole Army, and are the proponent for that. So I could talk at length about the person or the responsibility for the command that does that, but I figured what I'd spend most of the day talking about is the first word of my title, which is commander of TRADOC. And I'd like to talk to you from the point of view of a commander, not as the commander of TRADOC, but as a commander. And so what does a commander expect from its training enterprise? What does the commander expect from its simulations enterprise? What does a commander expect from its education enterprise? So in many ways, I'm sort of tasking myself as a previous end item user of those things and what you all focus on out here. And I'll kind of bin it sort of three things to talk about in two of those main areas. If we first look at training, when I came into the Army, which was many decades ago, we were just bringing in to fruition air-land battle, FM 100-5 operations, and as a forcing function, we stood up our combat training centers, with the National Training Center out at Fort Irwin, California, being the first one. And what training became was a forcing function to drive change into the Army. We wanted to change from an Army that had been consumed for a long period of time in the jungles of Vietnam, and at that time sort of pivoting, to use a term of art, to the Central Plains of Europe and the Soviet Union, and how are we going to operationalize air-land battle. So they said, we will use training as a way, as a forcing function to get this new intellectual idea into the Army of combined arms maneuver. And so we stood up our combat training centers, and they became sort of the mecca that, especially from a combined arms, mechanized infantry and armor background that I'm from, all eyes were on that. And you would go out there once during a tenure of a brigade commander's time in command over a couple of years, and you would have exquisite capability of instrumentation. You'd have a world-class opposing force that would duplicate the Soviet Union at that time. You have observer controllers that would sort of coach, teach, and mentor and provide those sort of hard-hitting AARs. We would instrument everything that went on. And it was a great training event, but it was once every 2 years for a brigade, and it was quite expensive, and it was high overhead. But that was sort of the training revolution that came into the Army when I first joined the Army. I think in the future, the training revolution that we are going to see in the Army is not necessarily more of just one sort of, golden gilded training event, but it is now taking a level of fidelity and experience of training it and bringing it back to sort of everyday home station training. Because while we had great training out there at these combat training centers, it was infrequent, it was very expensive, very high overhead, and you didn't get a lot of repetitions of it. Well, if you whether it's in sports and athletics or even in the conduct of war, one of the things that you need is that proverbial Malcolm Gladwell sort of 10,000 hours repetition and multiple times. And that training paradigm doesn't allow for it. And what happened is we started to sort of replicate that sometimes at home station, and it would be what I would call sort of it's almost, hypocritical for me to say, but the tyranny of training. Because the overhead of training became so large that you almost, unless you could do it to that scale, you wouldn't do any of it. Because you're like, well, if I can't have ARs, if I can't have a world-class OP4, and I have to have OC augmentees and OP4 augmentees, and the training overhead, the tyranny of training became so large that it also became infrequent, and you didn't get those reps even at home station. So what we are doing in the Army, and I think across the Joint Forces, we're trying to sort of reduce what I would call the tyranny of training, reduce the overhead, get to more reps, and bring it closer to where you sort of live and work every day, not in place of those large-scale training events, because there are things that can only happen out there. So it's not to replace that, it's to enter those very large-scale collective training events at a much higher level, so that when you get out to those things that are very expensive and have very high overhead, you're not doing basic kind of things. You've been able to do those 10,000 hours of repetition at home station at a much lower level using live, virtual, constructive training areas, synthetic training environment that was alluded to here, so that you get there at a much higher level. And so I see that as sort of the next training revolution coming into the Army, and probably the Joint Forces is changing how we view what is done day in and day out as we prepare for the large collective training events, getting rid of this sort of tyranny of training and high overhead. The other thing I would say is when I first came in the Army, as I said, air-land battle was coming into vogue. And so those were two domains, the land domain and the air domain, and we generally would bring them only together out at the National Training Center, which was located near Nellis Air Force Base, and so we'd work with the Air Force in that. But now, as we look at the complexity of the world out there and the challenges, the Army's newest concept that we're working across the Joint Forces, multi-domain battle. Because we're saying you can't just train in one domain, and actually even just two domains is not adequate. We have to bring together all the domains. So now you have to have a training environment that brings together space, cyber, maritime, land, and air. And it's got to be done, again, at a level of repetition that you build that muscle memory over experience and experience and experience. So we have to have a training strategy that from the very beginning you're thinking about the multiple domains that are occurring. And we had a great discussion just this morning, for instance, on cyber. Because sometimes what happens when you have this tyranny of training, you broke down into your silos or cylinders of excellence, and you would train separately various skill sets, and then maybe at a large collective event, you would then have to synchronize federated training capabilities. So you're spending a lot of time synchronizing training that occurred in a federated manner, and you weren't really getting the benefit. The whole was not greater than the sum of its parts. So we have to redefine the training requirement from the very beginning is a converged requirement with all of the domains, and that you can't, there will probably be separate pieces that occur by domain, but early on you bring them together so that, for instance, you're not just training cyber warriors how to operate in the cyber domain, you also have to simultaneously train maneuver folks, infantry, armor, or the air domain or the maritime domain, that they need to take into account the effects that occur in cyber. They may not be a cyber expert, but they have to be very well aware of the effects you're trying to get. And again, a converged planning process that brings those on early into the process, so they have to be aware of them. So you're not just training one domain, you're training the other domains to understand what that brings to the fight. And then the last part from training is it needs to be seen as a tool, not a task. A lot of times as I was growing up in the Army, we would have a training strategy with various gates, and sometimes some of our simulations and training aids and devices weren't all that great, but it would be put in the strategy like you have to do this first, then you have to do this, and you have to do this. And it may not have been actually a particularly useful tool for getting at what you want to get at, but it was a requirement. You can't do this until you get to this. And so it was a little bit of a check the block. What we need to do is make sure that when we take a look at our training capabilities and TADs and things like that, that commanders look at them and they want to use it. They say, this actually solves one of my training problems. It's not a tasking to do it. It's a tool that I can use to get better. And when I look at it as a tool, it's not just a tool to train for training's sake. It's a tool that I can use to train for specific missions, mission and rehearsal exercises, that if I am given a mission to go conduct an attack or whatever, I look immediately at what training capability I have to get ready for that mission. It's not a task, it's a tool that I use to get better. And in fact, the more often that we can use a tool that is used in actual preparation for a mission, is the same tool that's used in routine training, is the same tool that's used in the education domain, you are now building expertise in not only training, but in using that tool. So I tell folks we need as few one-trick ponies as possible out there, so we're not retraining how to train, how to use a tool to do a specific task out there. And then when I look at the education part of it as a commander, one of the things we have to do, and as the person that runs the education enterprise in the Army, I will, as all professionals, be sort of our greatest critic on that, is I think we have to start to, if I want to, it may not be the best choice of words, to blur training and education. Because what I find, especially in the education domain, that we try to create these artificial barriers, which are not really the way it occurs in real life. It's not really the way it occurs in war. So when I was out at Fort Leavenworth, I remember talking to a young major who asked me a question to, try to put you in a tough spot, because majors like to do that to generals. And it was a big setting, hundreds of very smart majors, just ask them. And I said, okay, any feedback on Command General Staff College, et cetera, like that, as if they wouldn't have an opinion on that. And one of the majors goes, hey, sir, I think you have an identity problem. You're schizophrenic here. I'm like, well, you've got my attention, Major, tell me more. And he said, well, sir, he says, so out here at Fort Leavenworth, Command General Staff College, are you running a training enterprise or an education? Are you educating me or training me? In other words, like you have to pick one. I said, well, actually, yes, we're doing both. And it is not a fine line between there, because sometimes you say, well, training is to train you to execute and perform things that you can plan for, that you know about, and education prepares you for things you don't know about. Training is about executing battle drills. Education is about learning new knowledge, and analysis, synthesis, gain understanding. But in reality, and I think even more so today, the lines between those are blurring. That you have to have training so you know how to use the tools that are out there, but you also have to bring in the education part of it, of understanding the complexity. I see the title is here, Win in a Complex World, which I appreciate that title, since that was the Army's operating concept that we put out, how to win in a complex world. So you know how to play to at least part of your audience here. And so to understand that complexity, you have to be educated to understand what I call the relationship of variables, yet you have to be trained in the art of war of the tools that you're using to lay on that understanding of the world. Because, Ian and I had this discussion this morning, from a training environment or education environment, we need to make sure we don't organize it to accomplish just that environment and optimize it, but we have to take the commander's point of view and say, what is the commander actually going to have to do in combat? And then we've got to facilitate what the commander's doing. We have to converge these domains and capabilities before they get to the commander, not make the commander the action officer. Because if you're a commander and you say, okay, I want you to attack objective A, commander's okay. And then now we're going to go through the planning process. The commander doesn't say, well, Am I going to use the skills that I was trained on in coming up with the plan, or am I going to use the skills that I was educated on to understand the complexity? Well, you don't break it down like that. You don't say this part of the plan is relying only on your training skills, and this part of the plan is only relying on your education skills. And make sure you don't use what you were educated on during phase 1 of the plan, because that's only training. It's interesting that I generally get this kind of feedback when I'm in the educational domain. I don't get it. So this is kind of a warning to you all that reside in that domain. I don't get it when I talk to people that think they're in the training domain. And I don't get it from soldiers that show up to a training event and say, and we're talking about training, but then we talk about critical thinking, et cetera. And the soldier goes, wait, no, don't talk to me about critical thinking and analysis synthesis. I'm here merely to be trained. It sounds like you're trying to give me some education here, and you know that's what I'm not here for. I never get that at a training event, but I do get it in an education forum, like, General, sounds like you're trying to train me here. I'm only here to be educated. So as a commander, I think we need to sort of blur those lines, because that isn't how life actually happens, and that's not how war actually happens. The other part of it is that as we take a look at, from an education point of view, I'm looking now inside the Army, maybe not be across all organizations like this. We have to work much better to be able to update what we have in our POI and what we are educating folks on, based upon the very quick and evolving nature of the complexity of the world out there. And we've got to bring in sort of lessons learned, bring in observations, and then contextualize them much quicker than we do. We tend to do it better in a training environment, tactics, techniques, and procedures. It takes a little bit longer, just because I think sometimes the bureaucracy is involved from an education point of view. So the way that in fact, I had a long session yesterday with the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Army staff about what we've seen recently in operations at Mosul and Raqqa and other places like that. And it's like, okay, how do we bring that into the education domain? And then the last point with that, how do I deliver it out to the point of need? And how can I package it? Because I can't have just one way to deliver that, because I can't necessarily bring everybody simultaneously every time something new happens back to a brick and mortar education institution. I've got to be able to deliver it across a field pretty rapidly and in different size bites. So when we do bring people back to the War College or Command General Staff College, we have a whole year, and you can get to a different level of fidelity. But sometimes if somebody's going out on a mission, there is knowledge we have to convey to them quickly in a very short amount of time, and probably in not as much depth. So how do we take the experience we have in doing it at a year at a time and condense it and bring out those key parts of it? And then the last thing is, we have to remind folks that when we educate them, it's not only for their own edification. Because one of the things that when we educate folks is we are educating them on how to convey knowledge themselves to other people, not just for their own consumption. So again, it was at out at Fort Leavenworth, Command General Staff College. It was a very scientifically designed sensing session called a Super Bowl party. And so having a beer with the major and talking to him again, asking him if by chance he had any input on the course. He goes, well, sir, actually, I'm glad you asked me, because he says, here's a problem for the Army. He says, so I just went through the whole training management, elective here for Leavenworth. I got educated on the 8-step training model and all these various things, and how you do assessment-based training and how you resource and all that. And he says, and I already got my orders. I'm going to head out to the 123 Infantry Battalion. And I just came from that division. And I know that actually, none of those captains out there, they don't know anything about this, et cetera, like that. So what are you going to do about it, General? Like, are you going to bring them all back here to Fort Leavenworth, the font of all knowledge, and educate them? And I said, well, Major, actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I said, what battalion was that? 123 Infantry. I said, yeah, I'm aware of the problem in that unit. So actually, I've designed a custom-made solution to that. A custom-made program, actually, here at Leavenworth has been focused for a year on solving that battalion's problem. And the solution is that I am going to graduate you and send you there. And you are now responsible for conveying the knowledge that we just educated you on to those young captains that don't know it. So especially sort of from a military setting, when we educate folks, one of the things we have to educate them on is they need themselves to know how to convey knowledge to people, because that's what happens. We don't send everybody to the Command General Staff College. We don't bring everybody to a brick and mortar, but we think enough people that they can go out and sort of proselytize and spread the word. So I just kind of ran through sort of some of my views as a commander, being an end item consumer of training, education, and then from a simulation point of view, what simulations do, they are a means to get to an end. They aren't an end in themselves. So if you look at ends, ways, and means, they are a mean to provide training. They are a mean to provide education. And so as you develop simulations, if they don't reduce the tyranny of training, if they don't help deliver to the point of need, if they don't allow you to update it with the real world changes that are going on quickly, if they are not multi-domain, if they don't do all of those things that I just outlined that I want for the ends of training and education, then it's not a good simulation, because it's not an end in and of itself. It is a mean to convey training and education. So sort of just having been a commander and a consumer of those things, those are some of the things I've seen that sometimes are self-limiting in that when they are looked at in separate stovepipes or separate silos. So it's not only within training when we want to converge the domains, and within education, within simulation, within all of those three endeavors, they really do need to be converged, because we are delivering an end to the commander. We don't want the commander to be the action officer that's going to pull all this stuff together. We should deliver that to him or her so that then they can cross the line of departure and get on with it. So I commend you all for taking on this difficult challenge there in the environment that we operate in as military men and women. It's about as a challenging environment that we could present you with, because of the complexity, because of the lethality, because of the changing nature of it, because of the ambiguity of it, because of the scale of it. But it's also one where your efforts produce great results, and they actually save lives, and they actually contribute to the significant capability of the U.S. military, which contributes significantly to the security of our nation. So I commend you all for spending a lot of time and energy on this. I've seen great progress in it. And again, a pleasure to come here and talk to you. I look forward to spending the day with you down on the floor and at the various forums, getting your insights into it. And if you want to know about TRADOC, I'll tell you that at a later point. But I really wanted to come here today to talk to you as a commander, as an end item user, as I task myself and actually task us together. So thanks a lot. And again, pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, General Perkins, for your remarks. It's now my privilege to introduce this year's keynote, Don Ariel, the co-founder and chief executive officer of Radon Corporation. Don, along with his two partners, Dave Donovan and the late Ray Hockney, founded Radon in 1998 with a vision of transforming simulation training using customer-focused creativity and interactive data models to help redefine what is possible, from the way training is funded to the way it's delivered. Under his leadership, Radon has become a leading employee-owned virtual training and simulation company that focuses on deep collaboration with the customers they serve. In addition to being Radon's CEO, Don's an engineer that possesses a rare blend of balance of technical understanding and innovative business mindset. His personal and professional interests center around understanding and improving human performance. His contagious enthusiasm and expertise on this subject is what fuels his passion as a tech visionary, a futurist, a thought leader, an executive, a trailblazer, and an entrepreneur. Don is passionate about helping to shape new standards, new breakthroughs, new frontiers, and new ways to train humans, especially for those risking their lives for us. Please welcome Mr. Don Ariel.
What an incredible honor I'm humbled at the opportunity to address a community I've worked in for 33 years. Let me first open with some thank yous. To every person that has ever donned the uniform, thank you. You made my life possible. You gave me the American dream. You've protected me, you've protected my family, you've protected my community, and you've faithfully defended both our country and our Constitution. To all who gave some, and especially to the Gold Star families that gave everything, thank you for your sacrifice. To the organizers of this conference, I also have to give a thank you. This year I saw the amount of work that goes behind putting something like this together. I also have to offer a very special thank you to a dear friend of mine and colleague, Dave Hutchings. He is a true patriot in every sense of the word, but he's also a kind man and an amazing father. General Perkins, thank you for your insight, and that was a very entertaining speech. I learn something new every day in this market, and it puts my feet on the floor with excitement. To my Radon family, past and present, thank you. You worked tirelessly in the pursuit of technology that would improve the likelihood of mission success for our customers and our end users. As the public face of the company, I was too often credited with your innovation. Most of all, to my lovely wife, Pam, you saved my life in every way possible. Thank you, sweetheart. You gave me the foundation to pursue with passion our purpose. You put up with long hours, years on the road, and many tough times. And through this, you raised our two beautiful children. And to my children, Tommy and Amy, thank you for teaching me the true meaning of joy and giving me a wonderful son-in-law and a wonderful daughter-in-law and what I happen to think are the most amazing grandchildren on the planet. Lastly, I want to thank the Army National Guard, all of you. You took a risk more than 20 years ago on a team of contrarians, anxious to solve training problems with emerging technology. You challenged us to find ways to put active component quality technology in every armory in 54 states and territories. You challenged us with unbelievable performance and cost targets. You challenged us to think outside the box. But most importantly, you challenged us to take risks and behave like a commercial company. These challenges helped us respond to 9/11 with scale, adaptable capability, and efficiency. My partners, Ray, Dave, and I, have sought to build a purpose-driven organization. Ray fought in the Philippines in World War II. Dave was the child of a retired Army officer who fought in Vietnam. I was raised in a family that proudly flew the American flag in front of our home. My grandmother was a Rosie the Riveter in the Springfield Armory. My wife's father was an Army Air Corps pilot and in World War II, and in fact, he loved to tell me about that little link box that we're all familiar with and how he was actually trained on it. Ray, Dave, and I have sought to inspire all around us to a cause greater than ourselves. And I have to tell you, to be able to dedicate the last 33 years to providing technologies, equipment, innovation, and services that warfighters have actually told me saves lives is purpose beyond the wildest dreams of three engineers that wanted to form a company. I would add 9/11 added a seriousness to the purpose I don't think any of us could have imagined, a scary purpose to us all. It shook up our notions of what agility looked like and how badly we compared to the asymmetrical threat array. As is true with every generation of Americans, we were equal to the cause. But there was an important lesson that came from it. We failed to anticipate it. We, in the training community in particular, we had hardened, purpose-built training infrastructures oriented on fighting our last war. Also, I might add that over time, a culture of us and them grew between government and industry. And I would challenge you, if you have developed a cynical view about that profit is the only motivating force in industry, or job security is the only motivating force in the government ranks, Look around this room. Walk the exhibit floor. Talk to some of these brilliant and committed patriots striving to make a real difference. We live in the most amazing country, and in my opinion, the most amazing of times. I believe our market is at the dawn of a truly new age, the information age of training. But before I get into that, I'd kind of like to share the single most important person in my professional life that forever changed my professional trajectory. Guilty, I'm a nerd. Spock made it okay. In fact, it wasn't just okay, it was cool to be a nerd. But the most important feature of this character that has driven me professionally is his reliance purely on science, data, facts, and logical reasoning. Moreover, I believe Spock's character shows us our new horizon in human performance, and that is the mystery of the mind. To say as a young man I was obsessed with the mind after watching Spock all those many episodes is an understatement. I want to give you a quick personal story. When I was in college, I had gotten a job in a movie theater. It was a dollar house. As such, the pay was beyond bad. In fact, I was salaried largely because they could not afford minimum wage. I like to tell people this was my first taste of what technically acceptable, low cost in a fixed priced environment was all about. But alas, I had a brilliant idea that would make Spock proud, to at least approach minimum wage by using a feature of the human mind. I had read an industry periodical about subliminal suggestion. This was the idea that you could speak to areas of the consciousness when you weren't aware. And in the 1950s, movie theaters would put a single frame in a key portion of the movie that would say something like, "You're thirsty." Now, since it was 24 frames a second, you did not register that. It's kind of like a Jedi mind trick. These are not the droids you're looking for. This practice was, of course, banned, but I was thinking it could be used for good, at least my personal good. So being a resourceful young man, I decided to experiment to see if I could make my audiences less slobbish. So at the peak of Raiders of the Lost Ark, I spliced a single frame that asked them to please pick up their litter. Wow, there was less trash in that theater. I was so excited to share this innovation with my boss. Yeah, he wasn't amused or impressed by my little technical innovation. In fact, to tell the truth, he kind of freaked out and he used words like crime, fines, jail, and that sort of stuff. I've learned a lot since then, but I believe us all developing a deep understanding of the mind of warfighters is our collective future together. In preparing for this address, a friend and longtime colleague suggested that I can help us all see the tectonic shifts that are happening to our market by employing a well-read thought piece in the space, War and Anti-War by Alvin and Heidi Toffler. The Tofflers taught us to imagine beyond the current paradigm of things into hiving our intellects together through information systems. They argued that we had to think beyond the paradigms of the industrial age and move towards an information age. Their vision inspired deep thinkers to drive us towards the concepts of information dominance. The Tofflers gave our community a mental shakeup about what computers and networks meant to warfare. Many of their predictions have already taken form, or we are beginning to see them now emerge. Where America's threats are large, diverse, and growing, so is our market's opportunity to deliver big, strategically differentiating overmatch, a training information dominance, if you will. But we all have a hard truth that we must accept. Honestly, this is not really the dawn of a new information age. We, the military training industry, are pretty much waking up in the middle of it, and we are late to adapt. The question to us all is, are we as a community equal to the task? Now that's a bold charge, but let me substantiate the point a bit. If we were in Toffler's equivalent of our information age of training, I would argue we would all have different and complementary information models on human performance. They would all be based on a common view that dynamically informs and drives a hive of human cooperation and decision-making on common training objectives across academia, industry, and government. Yet honestly, we can barely cobble together agreement on utilization data. We often hide or distort it to protect our programs or our products or our market. If we were in our information age, we would already have enormous knowledge and wisdom networks detailing every hour in categories that fed our understanding of the human body, the human brain, and the mind. Questions like, how many kilowatt hours did we use? What were they doing? How did they perform? How did they perform across time? What worked best? Do we understand it? Now that we understand it, can we do it better, faster, and cheaper? The old joke of the industrial age was you have three variables: cost, schedule, and deliverable. Pick the two you want. The information age will deliver all three and at an accelerating pace. Information age companies act differently. Look at Google, Apple, Microsoft. They all have cybersecure app stores. Where is ours? I'm not talking about the TRADOC app gateway. I'm talking about a marketplace where any of us can publish and sell innovation to warfighters on their live, virtual, constructive, or gaming systems. The threats are diverse. So must be our app store. Not one company, all companies. Information age companies cooperate to deliver rapidly increasing value to their customers. Information age companies do not define, they just expect, customers. We have millennials and rapid commercialization of our technology storming at us. We cooperate or we die. Our new information age of training demands it. So do soldiers, taxpayers, and liberty. I'm reminded of a quote I first heard from Winston Churchill. He said, "You can depend on Americans to always do the right thing, but usually it's only after they have exhausted every other possibility." Ladies and gentlemen, we have exhausted every other possibility. Information age strategies such as STI must be accompanied by information age methods. Material development is an industrial age method. It cannot keep up. This is a hard truth. We must let go of industrial age thinking, methods, and acquisition models. It is time to unleash American innovation on delivering human performance overmatch. The question is are we going to continue with the easy and familiar path, or are we willing to make the hard right? My dad used to tell me that you don't get paid to do easy. You get paid to do hard. That's why it's called work. Indeed, our SecDef is challenging us with this same notion. Quote, "I want to encourage all of you within strictly ethical regulations, do not have imaginary restrictions on your leadership responsibility to find the best bang for the buck, to find the most far-reaching innovations that are out there." I would submit that being sloppy in the past was acceptable during high-intensity conflict. It is hard to reform when you're fighting, and there's plenty of money around. But I think we can all see the entitlement bomb that is ticking on our future budgets. We can no longer buy our way out of future security threats given these economic realities. I'm reminded of another of Churchill's quotes. He said, Now that we have run out of money, we have to think. We together can use data and information age thinking and reasoning to find a way to a more secure future than we can possibly imagine today if we drop the constraints of industrial age methods and thinking. Albert Einstein said the definition of genius is taking the complex and making it simple. Harnessing new technology to win in a complex world means we must distill all the complexity of human performance into a simple understanding. No one company, organization, or person can do this alone. I use missile defense as an example of trying to make something simple. The problem is often simplified and described as trying to hit a bullet with a bullet. But we need information age strategies to accomplish that. We needed to increase the sample rates. We needed to increase the precision of the samples. We needed to expand the number of measures. We needed to develop amazing algorithms. We needed a deep understanding of the problem in order to make it sound simple. Let me take a shot at our complex. The body and the brain are really just hardware. The mind is software. Training is simply about writing and burning in new subroutines. Training an entire force is simply about doing that across time, across geography, and across all individuals within our target audience. We need to harness information age technologies, but more importantly, in my opinion, information age business practices. To hit our training bullet, we need a modern acquisition bullet. Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, said, "When the external rate of change exceeds the internal rate of change, the end is near." The Army has communicated the rate of change is no longer acceptable. The industrial age of training has ended. To my view, the Army has been communicating this for more than a decade. We stood up the Rapid Equipping Force because our industrial age methodologies could not respond to the acute demand. In 2005, our own community began to rent training enablers because material development could not deliver acceptable solutions in a timely manner. More recently, the Army has announced the formation of the Modernization Command, and the CAC-T has altered their STE acquisition strategy, a virtual round across all of our bows. They have no obligation to us, their loyal industry base, only to soldiers, taxpayers, and freedom. The Army will go anywhere where the rate of change of high value, attractive, affordable, and innovative capabilities are, period. We must want this as taxpayers. We must share this same commitment and take risk, starting with cooperating. A friend once paraphrased Albert Einstein, but about people. He told me, ineffective people make simple things seem complex. Effective people make the complex seem simple. The same is true for markets. We must move quickly to deliver rapidly improving human performance innovation by making the complex seem simple. Acquisition of new capabilities must be simple to the commander, and we must study their choices, not dictate them. Selling now innovation to services must be simple. Budgeting and funding towards strategic objectives must be simple. Adapting our training strategies must be simple. Harvesting commercial innovation must be simple. But in our information age, sharing our information, our knowledge, and our wisdom must also be simple. It is time for us to self-organize, adapt to this new paradigm, or die. Chief of Staff of the Army Mark Milley states the problem clearly. Quote, "Right now, the Army's structure, the institution, the processes, the organization is not coherent to deliver effective capabilities for the future. As freedom-loving peoples, what do we intend to do about it? As a technology market, we must respond to this call. However, if you need a self-preservation motivation, let me put it to you this way. The jobs can be in Central Florida, or they can be in Silicon Valley. Markets that value timely innovation do not care where it comes from. If we want those jobs to be here, we must think differently and we must act differently. The moral contract between military customers and their loyal industry base must evolve. We are now in the information age of training. In closing, I would like to offer two separate challenges. First, to my industry partners. We must standardize and open our platforms, employing standards that we, the innovative and risk-taking industry base, create and sustain. Cooperation is about survival. We should think about competition like any great sports league does. The objective is to win the championship each year, not put each other out of business. We need to revel in each other's innovation and instead reward innovation that we did not expect. A friend pointed out many years ago, if Henry Ford had asked his customers what they wanted, it would have just been a better horse. In the information age, good now must always win over better later. In the information age of training, wait is a four-letter word. As industry, we need to be thinking and acting on how exactly to cooperate and compete to deliver not just good now, but best possible now, while cooperating to deliver better next and then amazing after that. That's how information age companies work. To my government partners, the lesson of other information age markets is clear. The fastest way to better later is to reward good now. If you believe in the vision I've painted, do me a favor. If you see something that can help you now, buy it now, rent it now, try it now. We're all Americans here. If you see me or my colleagues or risk-taking or rewarding innovation as a threat to your program, and therefore somehow a threat to democracy, and your mission is to protect the warfighter and the taxpayer from us rather than our enemies, your mindset has us frozen in the industrial age. It is time to change how we think. We all must. It's a moral imperative. I don't have to remind this audience that we all have warfighters in harm's way. I ask all of you to continue to keep them, and especially their families, in your thoughts and prayers. But thoughts and prayers are not enough. What we do matters to them and can affect whether they come home or not. The industrial age status quo impedes them accessing our best collective capabilities and our innovations. In speaking for all industry, I want to leave you with one parting thought. We don't do this to make money. We make money so that we can do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Finally, I would like to invite Rear Admiral Jim Robb, President of the National Training and Simulation Association, to the stage for his remarks. Please enjoy the conference.
Thanks, Dave. What a great start to ITSEC 2017. I'd like to get one more round of applause for our triple threat, the 2 keynotes and the national anthem. So here we have come together as a family for the 51st time to really revel in the collective goodness of the folks and the capabilities we've brought to Orlando. I really want to challenge you all to go out and take advantage of the next 2.5, 3 days. There is a world-class show floor over there that we will take apart, unfortunately, on Thursday afternoon. So it's a perishable quantity. It's something that you need to really plot and go after with a precision. In support of all the questions that I get was, I'm here now, what do I do? The first thing I'd ask you to do is to download the ITSEC app. The ITSEC app is our electronic means of helping you connect from attendee to attendee to the industry folks. You can word search the entire program on the app. You need to spend some time up front planning your show and planning your stay here, because there's way too much content to go do sort of a chaos theory about how to engage it. This is a really rare opportunity for the entire training community to come together, to meet each other, to meet new friends, and to seek out new capabilities. And I really want to impart a sense of urgency that this will be over much quicker than we'd like. And it's just a very rich environment, so please take advantage of it. Also wanted to highlight a couple of things. Dave and the team have put together an incredible program. It's probably the best that I've seen in the 6 years I've been here, but it's content rich and it's really packed. So the challenge again is to pick the things you want to see. We're going to follow up this with a world-class Flag General Officer panel here at 10:30. Tomorrow, the Vice Chief of Naval Operations will come down with an airplane full of flag officers. And he is going to do another keynote, and then we'll have a couple of flag officer panels after that. So they will start at 10:30, and then the second one at 1300. The 1300 one was a late add, so I just bring that to your attention. Lastly, I just want to really thank everybody for being here. This is hard. It's hard to travel. It's hard to get approvals to come to ITSEC. We continue to grow, though, and the government attendance this year is spectacular. The industry presence is very strong. So the whole program of ITSEC and its 51 years of history are rich and in very good shape. So I thank you for all of that. So with that, I will officially pronounce the opening ceremonies closed. Invite you to come back and be in your seats at 10:25 for the Flag General Officer SES panel. Thank you.